Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at one of the internet's absolute most infamous mysteries. But to really wrap our heads around what happened to Elisa Lam, we have to start with the incredibly chilling setting that made this entire tragedy possible: the dark history of the Cecil Hotel. There's this quote from a former manager that says it was a place where the distance between the living and the dead had completely vanished. I mean, wow. That just perfectly captures the dark lore of this downtown Los Angeles landmark. It wasn't just a building, it was an absolute magnet for tragedy.
Which brings us to the infamous Cecil Hotel itself.
Because you really can't understand Elisa's fate without understanding the incredibly sinister history of where she checked in. It's like the building is a main character in this dark story. Okay, so it opened in 1924 as this grand luxury spot for wealthy tourists, right? But then the Great Depression hit, the surrounding area turned into Skid Row, and things went downhill fast. By the 1980s, the top floor was literally home to the notorious serial killer Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. And then in the 90s, another serial killer, Jack Underweger, stayed there too.
The history here is just intensely dark. Former managers reported this constant daily stream of tragedies. Talking suicides, drug overdoses. Police were sometimes called to the hotel up to 3 times in a single day. So you can see how this macabre environment set the absolute perfect stage for the paranormal paranoia that would explode years later.
And that leads us to part 2, the bizarre elevator video.
So what's so fascinating and heartbreaking is how this bright, adventurous 21-year-old student from Vancouver, Elisa Lam, just walked right into this deeply troubled environment on January 28, 2013. Almost immediately, things got weird. Hotel management actually had to isolate her because her roommates were complaining about some highly unusual behavior. She was locking them out, demanding secret passwords, and leaving these really aggressive get-out notes on their beds. So they moved her to a private room, room 506. She had been calling her parents every single day. But then on January 31st, the day she was supposed to check out and head to Santa Cruz, the calls just abruptly stopped.
Her parents were terrified. They flew straight to LA, got the LAPD involved, and police searched everywhere. They even brought in sniffer dogs, but they found absolutely nothing. Then, on February 14th, the police released a video, just 4 minutes of elevator security footage, and those 4 minutes literally made the whole world's hair stand on end.
If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The footage is so unsettling because her behavior is just so erratic. She walks in normally, but then suddenly she ducks and presses herself into the corner, like she's desperately hiding from a killer. Then she pops her head out, rapidly scanning the hallway, and she presses almost every button on the panel, but the door just stays open. And then comes the really creepy part. She steps out and starts making these bizarre, unnatural hand gestures, twisting her fingers around, completely looking like she's interacting with some invisible entity. Finally, she walks away and the doors close.
Now let's look at the gruesome roof discovery.
While millions of people on the internet were completely obsessing over this video, trying to play amateur detective, a very real physical horror was happening to the actual guests staying at the Cecil. Imagine this. You turn on your shower and the water comes out black. Guests started complaining about foul-smelling, incredibly low-pressure water coming from their bathroom taps. It was so bad that management finally had to act on February 19th.
So a maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez heads up to the roof to check on the hotel's 4 massive water tanks. He gets up there and notices that the heavy lid on one of the tanks is just sitting open. He climbs up, looks into the dark water, and finds Elisa's naked body floating inside. Her red hoodie, her shorts, the exact same clothes from that elevator video, along with her watch and room key, were just floating nearby. And this discovery, it raised what felt like impossible questions, mostly because the roof access doors were alarmed and strictly off-limits to anyone but employees.
Which brings us to the paranormal theories and wild coincidences. Because of the hotel's deeply dark history and the seemingly impossible physics of how she could have reached that roof undetected, internet sleuths just completely bypassed logic and went straight for the supernatural. And honestly, the coincidences didn't help. The parallels between her death and the 2005 horror movie Dark Water are staggering. I mean, in the movie, you literally have black water leaking from ceilings, a girl's body found in a roof tank, and an incredibly creepy elevator scene. In reality, the exact same things were happening at the Cecil. It's no wonder this cinematic coincidence convinced millions that ghosts, black magic, or some murderous hotel employee were to blame. But let's step back and look at the medical truth that was finally revealed. We have to stick to the facts here.
Weeks later, the Los Angeles coroner's office released their reports, and it completely shattered those supernatural theories with hard, devastating science. The results were definitive. Absolutely no signs of physical trauma, no broken bones, no forced entry, and no sexual assault. She hadn't consumed any illegal drugs or alcohol either. What this meant was clear. She wasn't murdered. She was entirely alone during her final moments. To figure out what really happened, investigators had to look deep into her past. Through a personal blog she ran in 2010 called Ether Fields, they found documentation of a severe battle with depression and bipolar disorder. Her family had kept the illness incredibly private, but she had a history of severe hallucinations whenever she went off her medication. Actually, in one previous instance, she was so absolutely terrified by her own mind that she hid under her bed and had to be hospitalized. Which leads us to a vital piece of the puzzle.
The toxicology report. It found traces of her prescribed antidepressants, but, and this is absolutely crucial, there were zero traces of the antipsychotics or mood stabilizers she was supposed to be taking to manage her disorder.
Medical science tells us that if a bipolar patient takes antidepressants without those mood stabilizers, it can trigger a massive manic episode, resulting in a state known as psychosis. Now, psychosis is this severe mental state where a person completely loses touch with reality. They experience intense paranoia and hallucinations that feel 100% real to them. So when psychiatrists analyzed that famous elevator footage, they confirmed what was really happening. She wasn't hiding from a ghost. She was desperately fleeing from terrifying invisible threats created entirely by a psychotic break inside her own mind.
So, let's look at the tragic, rational conclusion to all of this. With the paranormal stuff completely dismantled, we're just left with a mechanical mystery. How did she bypass those internal roof alarms without a staff key? Well, 2 weeks later, a Chinese tourist posted a video that totally solved it. You could easily bypass the alarms by just climbing out a 14th floor hallway window. And interestingly enough, that was the exact window where the LAPD sniffer dogs had originally lost Elisa's scent. From there, you just step onto the exterior fire escape, climb up, and you're on the roof completely undetected.
Running from her terrifying hallucinations, she likely reached the roof, climbed the tank ladder to hide, and jumped in. But the water level was too low to reach the rim, and there was no ladder on the inside. She was trapped in freezing water. And the fact that she was found naked, that actually isn't a mystery either. Forensic experts explain that stripping off clothes in water is a well-known biological survival response. Heavy, wet clothes pull a drowning person under. It wasn't a ritual. It was a desperate, exhausting attempt to stay afloat before she tragically drowned.
In the aftermath of this profound tragedy, Elisa's parents sued the Cecil Hotel for negligence, basically saying, hey, those roof tanks should have been locked. But a judge ultimately dismissed the lawsuit, ruling that this was an unforeseeable tragedy, not corporate negligence.
You know, this perfectly highlights the core lesson of this whole explainer. For years, millions of people scoured the internet looking for a cinematic villain. Ghosts, ancient curses, a murderous staff member, but the real enemy was a severe medical crisis. Because of the dark history behind the Cecil, we all wanted a thriller movie, when we really should have been looking at the devastating reality of untreated psychosis.
So, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. Why is it that we so often prefer a movie villain over the harsh reality that our own mind can be our biggest enemy? Next time you dive into a true crime mystery, just remember, sometimes the most terrifying threats aren't hiding in the dark hallways of a creepy hotel. They're coming from within.